I can, so join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes & Co.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. And welcome to Sunday with Michael Portillo. Each week at this new time of 11 o'clock, I hope to bring to your Sunday good conversation, arts and entertainment, ethical dilemmas and a sense of the ridiculous too. Coming up as the Prime Minister calls on National Health Service leaders to be bold and radical in addressing the treatment crisis. Tomorrow, junior doctors will ballot on strike action. They could join the nurses and ambulance staff in downing tools. The Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, suggests that productivity improvements could help to secure a deal. But is the NHS in need of structural reform? Alongside taxes, death remains the only certainty. Professor Dame Sue Black is a forensic anthropologist whose pioneering identification techniques have reunited the dead with their identity. And what does classical music mean to the human race and to our humanity? Celebrated cellist Julian Lloyd-Webber will be here to explore the question. All of that to come, but first, with the news, Tatiana Sanchez.
Michael, thank you very much. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has admitted the NHS is undeniably under enormous pressure. Rishi Sunak told the BBC he has a renewed sense of confidence and optimism to get to grips with the ongoing crisis within the health service. Following emergency talks yesterday, he's calling on health leaders to take bold and radical action, saying a business-as-usual mindset won't fix the challenges. Health Minister Maria Caulfield told GB News the NHS is facing even more pressure this winter.
A twindemic of both COVID and flu. We're seeing over 50% increase in the number of patients in with flu at the moment. That has a knock-on effect if beds aren't available for A&E, which leads to the long waits which you described, and that has a knock-on effect on ambulances being stuck at A&E trying to unload their patients.
The president of the Royal College of Nursing says the current crisis in A&E is much worse than before. The union has warned upcoming strikes will be the biggest ever in the industry if the Prime Minister doesn't negotiate on pay. The RCN's General Secretary Pat Cullen has told Rishi Sunak to meet her halfway to ensure the industrial action this month doesn't go ahead. The union also says it's willing to consider a 10% pay rise rather than 19%. Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting told us they expect the government to sit down and negotiate.
I'm afraid I did have to say to the nurses, however much I totally sympathise with their pay claim, I would kind of, on all honesty, Camilla, say if I was in government today, I'd be able to give them 19%. But we did say we would sit down and negotiate. I think that's what the government should do.
The director of Orthodox Conservatives, Joseph Robertson, says the government needs to listen to the people on the ground who know the challenges and where the money should be spent.
I think a lot of the problem with what's going on is that they're speaking from a top-down perspective. They're not looking at experienced workers. I think we need more decentralisation. I think we need more power back to those who are running practices, who are running centres around the country, and actually listening to their ideas of where the money should go, rather than the government just pouring in money without any real structure to that development.
Labour has been urged to team up with the Scottish National Party to block the government's plans for minimum service levels during strikes. SNP's Westminster has requested a meeting with Sir Keir Starmer to discuss policy proposals. The bill will be introduced in Parliament in the coming weeks to ensure vital public services maintain a basic function when workers go on strike. Russia has bombed eastern Ukraine minutes after ending its self-declared ceasefire in the country. The governor of Kharkiv says a man died as a result of Russian shelling. President Putin ordered a 36-hour ceasefire in honour of Russia's Orthodox Christmas, which ended at midnight last night. Ukraine had rejected that truce and shelling continued along the front line. Moscow says it's vowing to carry on fighting until they win the war. Prince Harry has been accused of making the Invictus Games a target for extremists by revealing in his memoir that he killed 25 Taliban fighters in Afghanistan. The former head of the Royal Navy says the Games, which are due to be held in Dusseldorf in Germany, will now have serious security issues because of the connection to Harry. He called the Duke very stupid. And one of the Princess Diana's most famous dresses is set to go on sale at Sotheby's in New York later on this month. The strapless evening dress is worth between £66,000 and £99,000. Diana first wore the dress for an official portrait with the then Prince of Wales in 1991. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Portillo.
Thanks, Tatiana. Tomorrow, the British Medical Association will start a ballot of more than 45,000 junior doctors on strike action over pay. This so-called action would involve a 72-hour stoppage in March and would escalate the current withdrawal of work in the National Health Service. This week, ambulance staff will be out again and nurses will stage their third stoppage on the 18th and 19th of January. In 2016, when over 300,000 appointments and operations were cancelled during 4 separate strikes, but on this occasion, given the length of the proposed strike, the effect could be worse. The BMA says that junior doctors have suffered, quotes, a staggering and unjustifiable, end quote, 26% cut in their income since 2008. Well, certainly in any case, Britain's public health service is in a shocking state of failure. Steve Barclay, the Health Secretary, calls for productivity improvements, and the Prime Minister says that the management needs to be bold and radical. What chance of that? Well, in a moment, we'll talk to a nurse who's currently working in the National Health Service and a former consultant. But first, I'm joined by former Health Secretary Stephen Dorrell. Stephen, good morning. Stephen, do you think there is an opportunity now for reform? And if you were in office today, what would the most useful reform be?
Well, I think when we use the word reform, Michael, we should remember that actually the latest management reform of the National Health Service is 6 months old. It came into effect on the 1st of July 2022, when I think very belatedly, but nonetheless it has now happened, that we've established local management structures, integrated care systems in the jargon, that bring together social care, the different parts of the National Health Service, into a joined-up structure. That's something that should have been done many years ago, but has now been done and is, I think, an important element. It's absolutely not a silver bullet, but it is an important element in using the resources the taxpayer commits to the health and social care system. It's a single system more effectively than has been the case in the past.
On this programme quite recently, a consultant surgeon was telling me that in recent times, never does he succeed in beginning his operating list at 8:30 in the morning. He offered a case of champagne if those around him could make it happen. He found that he was operating on half as many people as he was at the beginning of his career 30 years ago. We've just heard from a panel where people were talking about the mismanagement of the middle management section of the National Health Service. And I'll be talking shortly to a professor who's going to tell us about the failings of the GP contract. Are there not reforms galore that need to be tackled in the National Health Service?
Well, of course, there's a danger, Michael, when people like you and I who've been politically engaged in this over a long period, that we talk about reform as though it's something that's never happened before. Absolutely, there are changes that are necessary. And I've just identified one that belatedly the political class has put in place and which does need to be followed through. But you can't solve the problem in an A&E department without addressing the problems in hospital, in people delayed discharges out of hospital, people who should never have been in hospital in the first place if the social care system had been working better. We also need to use the resources available through pharmacy and through other parts of the health service in order to ensure that we haven't got people waiting to see GPs who don't actually need to see the GP. And your example about the consultants not starting lists on time, is absolutely right. I completely agree with that. And that's about making sure, again, that the different elements of the system work more effectively together. Planning, too often it happens that it's a surprise that somebody emerges out of an operating list, and there are consequences to that in terms of recovery support, the need for a discharge place, the need for family support. It's about creating a single joined-up system that plans for the use of resources effectively. In other sectors, doctors don't always like to be reminded of this, but this is not unique to healthcare. It's what's called supply chain management in other sectors.
Stephen Dorrell, former Health Secretary, great pleasure to speak to you. And I'm now joined by Professor Marion Thomas, who's a former consultant and has been quite a controversialist. You've written several articles. First of all, you made some very important statements about your view about the GP contract and how that was letting patients down.
Yes, absolutely. So in 2004, the BMA revised the GP contract, and basically GPs only work office hours. They work 9 to 5, and that's it. They have no responsibility for clinical care in the evenings, at weekends, or bank holidays. So no care for urgent responsibility at all during those times. That's really, really tragic, and that's put a huge pressure on the accident and emergency, and that's part of the problem with accident and emergency waits, no doubt at all about it.
Because a patient who cannot get an appointment with a GP takes his or her problem down to A&E.
Absolutely. But it's worse than that, because the GPs, they have a contract, but basically they run their own practices. And as a consultant surgeon, I had a contract, I had a job plan, I had to stick to that job plan, I was appraised on that job plan, etc. But GPs basically can almost do as they wish, and the fact of life is that about 50% of GPs work 3 days or less. 50% of GPs work 3 days or less. Some work 2 days, some work even less than that. Now, the Royal College of GPs will never concede that, they will never talk about that. That and the contract, they just don't talk about. And I was delighted to hear Wes Streeting saying recently, describing the GP contract as murky and opaque. And if he gets into power, or if the Labour Party gets into power, he will sort it out. Absolutely right, Wes. You're on the money. Just if there's a heaven, I'm sure an Iron Bevan is up there saying, get on with it, Wes. We'll sort them out.
You also made a very interesting point in a very recent article about our own responsibility for our own health. And you were talking about obesity.
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, tell us a bit about the significance of obesity for diseases.
Well, obesity is very important, and it's kind of out of control in this country. And I took the view that the reason it was out of control, that people weren't well enough informed about it. So what I wrote, I didn't write a fat-shaming article. I wrote an article just saying the facts about obesity. For example, if you're obese, which means BMI 30 to 40, your life expectancy is reduced by 3 years. If you're 40 to 50, your life expectancy is reduced by 10 years. If you're more than 50, your life expectancy is reduced by 15 years. But before you die, then you have a long period of debility for many, many reasons. Mainly diabetes, which is an insidious disease, and it can be very crippling if it's not tackled and if you don't lose weight. Cardiovascular disease, heart attack, strokes, etc. Cancer, big problem. So many cancers are now related to obesity. I think the figure in my paper was 28,000. That was from the Cancer Research UK paper recently, and of course joint problems and that sort of thing. And you know, the point about obesity, you could be very careful talking to patients about obesity. They get very, very angry, they get very annoyed about it. So basically, I never actually brought the matter into any discussion with patients.
Is that so? Because on one occasion I was told that I was overweight and I thought it was the most useful conversation I'd ever had. I immediately acted upon it. I got scared. Stay with us, Professor Thomas. But we're going to be joined now by Portillo Raju. She's a neonatal nurse in Buckinghamshire. Thank you very much for joining us. May I just ask you, do you feel that your time is well managed? Do you see the time of your patients being well managed? Do you think you work within a well-oiled organisation?
So I'm quite lucky in where I work because it's a small unit, it's 16 beds, so we are quite grateful for the management. But however, we are starting to feel the pressure because a lot of people are falling sick, which means that we are short-staffed, and then it's putting pressure on the management that we give, the care we give to our patients. I do feel sometimes parents say to us, they start to see that that we are short-staffed, and they do mention it to us, which is really unfair for them. And it's quite sad in that aspect because where I work is neonatal nursing, so it's premature babies. So they should be more focused on their baby and accepting that they have a premature baby and preparing for that.
And more generally, because I assume your unit is set within a hospital, do you find that people in the hospital speak well of the way they're organised? I keep going back to this conversation I had with a surgeon recently who told me that it was just impossible to get his list into the theatre, that he was doing about half what he used to do about 30 years ago. Do you see organisational problems around you?
I do, because we are quite linked with the paediatric ward, and when I am working down there, I am paediatric based. I am trained in paediatrics, so I do see that pressure with having 5 to 6 patients, and it can sometimes lead to unsafe care and practice. You don't give the practice that you've been trained to do, and it's unfair for the patients that are quite sick, especially with what's going around. There's loads of bugs going around with the children catching it, and it's putting a lot of pressure on our staff.
I have every sympathy. Let me just turn back to Marion Thomas. It strikes me that in such a vast organisation as the National Health Service, there must be good practice and there must be bad practice.
Yes.
And a good management would say, it's good practice, let us replicate it all the way through the system.
Yeah. Well, can I say, I worked at the Royal Marsden Hospital for 29 years, and it worked like clockwork. You know, I had no trouble getting the patients down on time. Sometimes I used to annoy people by going to get them myself. We could get 7 or 8 patients done in one operating list. For lots of our theatre staff were from the Philippines. Very, very good, very expert. And also, they're quite happy to work overtime because they had families at home and they want to spend money back. So
could that practice be replicated across the system? Well, whatever you were doing right.
Well, you know, one of the things about the Royal Marsden Hospital is no casualty department, and it was just a cancer hospital. And there was never a time when I would go into the hospital and say, Marion, I'm very sorry, your list is cancelled, or you've lost your main case on the list because someone came off a motorbike last night on the King's Road and they're in intensive care.
I've got the point. And that takes us all the way back to the original point you made about the GP contract putting pressure onto the A&E. Marion, if I may call you that, Professor Thomas, please come back another day because you've a fund of interesting experience to tell us about. So I thank Stephen Dorrell as well and Portillo Raju. Coming up, Prince Harry's book has finally hit the bookshops this week with multiple leaks. We're already well informed that it's filled with accusations, claims and allegations. Will you actually be buying it? That's after the break.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio or online, every morning it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8". My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Welcome back. Well, we have had the opera interview, we have had the Netflix documentary, and now on Tuesday we will have the book, Spare, a reference to The Heir and the Spare by the King's son, Prince Harry, will finally go on sale. Extracts from the book have been leaked, despite security around the publication, which has been likened to the release of the Harry Potter books. It's full of accusations and, in my view, pettiness and bile. So far, the palace has stuck to its mantra of never complain, never explain. 2 interviews with Prince Harry air later today. In one of them, here, the Duke of Sussex explains to Tom Bradby why he felt obliged to speak out.
I don't know how staying silent is ever going to make things better.
Wouldn't your brother say to you, Harry, how could you do this to me? After everything we went through, wouldn't that be what he would say?
He'd probably say all sorts of different things.
Some people will say, you have railed against invasions of your privacy all your life. But the accusation will be, here are you invading the privacy of your most nearest and dearest without permission. That'll be the accusation.
That would be the accusation from the people that don't understand or don't want to believe that my family have been briefing the press.
If you're invited to the coronation, will you come?
There's a lot that can happen between now and then. But, you know, the door is always open. The ball is in their court. There's a lot to be discussed, and I really hope that they are willing to sit down and talk about it.
Do you still believe in the monarchy?
Yes.
Do you believe you'll play a part in its future?
I don't know.
Katie Nicholl is a royal commentator and author of The New Royals, and she joins me now. He says there at the end he doesn't know whether he has a part in the future of the royal family. I think it's quite a strong feeling today that he's done himself a mischief, that he's kind of burned his boats with the book, that this has gone that extra mile. What's your feeling?
Well, I think it's far more than mischief. I think it's a huge amount of damage that he has caused the royal family. It's not a constitutional crisis. Prince Harry is now a peripheral figure within the royal family. He stood down as a working member, but he retains the title of the Duke of Sussex. And it's interesting that comment he makes to Tom Bradby, and I'm going to be very interested to watch this interview tonight because Tom is a brilliant interviewer. He's a brilliant journalist. I think there's a lot of frustration that they haven't really been asked challenging questions in the Oprah interview. There weren't enough probing questions, I think, in a lot of people's opinions.
I would say none at all.
Well,
you think Tom's going to do something?
I hope so. I hope so. And it was interesting to see him ask Harry if he believes in the institution of monarchy, and Harry is very quick to respond to say yes, and yet he doesn't seem able to see the damage that he is causing the institution. So it's not a constitutional crisis, but it is very damaging to the monarchy on the international stage.
I understand this interview may have been done some time ago. I just have this image of Prince Harry now with his head over his hands because the response in Britain, it seems to me, is from his point of view pretty disastrous. And
well, if he's reading the papers, Michael, and if he's keeping track, which I'm sure he is.
I think he must be.
I'm sure he must be.
But tell me, I know you're UK-based, but
I write for Vanity Fair, so I'm very in touch with the US audience too.
Do you think there's been a sea change in the way the Americans are perceiving it?
Absolutely.
And which Americans?
I think the younger generation of Americans are still quite behind Harry and Meghan. They loved the Netflix series. They feel that it's absolutely right that Harry and Meghan have their chance to tell their truth. I'm sure they will be poring over this autobiography. I think the older generation, I think the more traditional royalists who still love Prince Harry are concerned for his well-being. I've heard a lot of people say he must be unwell. What is going on here? We're worried about him. And then there are also a lot of older Americans who are saying what he's doing is absolutely wrong. We loved the Queen. We want to see King Charles celebrated at his coronation, and what he's doing to the royal family is wrong. So I think there is a mixed reception over in the US, and there is definitely a different reception amongst the age groups, but I think the tide is turning. And when you think back to Megxit, their return, well, in Meghan's case, her return to America, and for Harry, his welcome to America was really celebrated. America was hugely excited about this young, dynamic, glorious royal couple. I'm very proud that they were in California. But there is also a sense of what are they going to do next? Where are they going to go next? How long can they continue to sling mud at the royal family? Are we going to see them do anything?
What I see is a man destroying his own dignity. I mean, to talk about your private parts, to talk in, I think, a politically pretty incorrect way about how he lost his virginity, to talk about how many people he claims to have killed in Afghanistan. It took me back to when I was Defence Secretary. There was an unfortunate incident where a very senior officer betrayed some secrets in a book, and I had to tell him that he would no longer be welcome at the Special Forces Club. He was completely crushed. I mean, I can imagine Harry not being welcome on military premises, which is crushing.
He will be crushed by that. I mean, the military was very much his second family. I think when you look back at his military career, and of course he served two tours of Afghanistan, for my Harry book, my biography on Harry, I spoke to many people who had served with him in theatre in Afghanistan, and every person I spoke to said he was a brilliant soldier, that they loved Harry, that Harry put his life on the line for his people, his Queen and his country. And now that he has created such a backlash with that, frankly, unnecessary comment, one line could have been so easily taken out.
There are so many people out there who I suppose masquerade as his friends who are causing him this damage. You can imagine the publishers and the agents and so on.
And the ghostwriter who's taken a $5 million advance for all of this.
There's $5 million for this and $20 million for that and $100 million for the other. And they say, oh, Harry, to make it worth it, just tell us about your private parts. Tell us about... it's just simply...
Listen, on Afghanistan aside, because I think that was absolutely wrong, and why the editor or the ghostwriter or someone with some sense didn't say, Harry, this is going to land you in hot water, let's take it out. The bits about the frostbite on his nether regions, having known Harry for as long as I have, there is a wonderful sense of humour and mischief and fun about this man. And I see so much of that has been lost in recent years. And I think that was Harry having a bit of a joke.
And I can see that losing your virginity is also an amusing story. But of course, it does involve someone else who's now being pursued relentlessly by the press.
Absolutely. And I think you make an interesting point here. And it's the point that Tom puts to Harry in that clip of the interview. The impact of Harry's words on people who don't have a voice to answer back or who aren't able to answer back. And I'm thinking most particularly of the King and of the Prince of Wales. We've had a dignified, because I do think it's a dignified silence from Buckingham Palace. I actually think it is the right strategy to not respond.
Absolutely. It seems to me that the book now settles this. The royal strategy, I think, has been proved to be right. That is to say nothing, to sit tight, to let them destroy themselves. And I mean, it doesn't give you any satisfaction because you know him and you like him and so on. But let's face it, they have now reached the point, at least in British society, I think, of destroying themselves.
There is an element of self-destruction in all of this, of sabotage. I mean, if you consider Harry and Meghan got what they wanted. They got to keep their titles. They got to move to America. They didn't get everything they wanted in Megxit, but they had the opportunity to start a new chapter. They've got these two beautiful children, a house that most people could only dream of, and they had the opportunity to make a fresh start. And for me, the sadness in all of this is that they don't seem to have seized that opportunity. They are dwelling on the past. There is so much anger and resentment and bitterness in Spare. That comes across so much. I think there's a sense that they've got to move on. And I think we feel that here in Britain, and they're feeling that more and more in America.
Which is, I think, quite significant. Katie Nicholl, thank you very much indeed. Do you ever find yourself paralysed by strong feelings at work? Do you overreact to criticism? Do you find yourself responding more like a child than the adult that you are with colleagues and bosses? Or are you a hard-working, successful person who nonetheless harbours doubts about your competence despite all the evidence to the contrary? Naomi Shragai is a psychotherapist, business consultant, and she asks those questions in a new book, Work Therapy, or The Man Who Mistook His Work for His Life. Naomi, welcome. It's lovely to see you. Do you find in your practice now that you're seeing more people who, instead of coming to talk to you about their love lives or their private lives, are coming to talk to you about their work lives?
Yes, exactly. And that has prompted me to write this book. I mean, over the years, more and more people are coming to me with work-related issues. And I find this very interesting because normally people are acting out their emotional lives, their, their historic lives in their personal relationships and in their family. But more and more people now are wanting to talk about work. They're feeling more vulnerable at work. They're feeling more strongly at work. And this is what they want to explore and examine. And this is what has prompted me to write about this topic.
What is your explanation for this change?
Well, I think what happens is people are identifying more strongly with work. They're spending a lot more hours in the workplace, and work is provoking a lot of strong feelings. You know, at work, the expectations are quite high. People are engaged in very close relationships. It gives rise to fears of not being successful, perhaps fears of failure, fears of being inadequate or incompetent. And also there's the issues of dependency. You know, people are dependent on their boss or their underlings or their colleagues. And that tends to evoke experiences from their early family lives, their earlier or initial experiences of dependency.
Let's explore that thought in just a moment. But in the first part of that answer, you said people are spending longer at their workplaces. But my perception is that many people are spending hardly any time at their workplaces. Or to you, does it not make any difference whether they're in an office or in front of a computer at home?
Well, it does make some difference, and we can explore that. But the truth is that people are identifying more strongly at work. So they're more preoccupied with work, and they're feeling strongly at work. And this is what's provoking these very strong feelings.
All the things you said about, you know, dependency and culture and rivalries in the office and so on, it seemed to me that that could have been as true 40 years ago, that's as far as my experience goes back, as it is now, but you think something has changed there?
Well, I don't. Something has changed in the sense that people are identifying more strongly with work than perhaps they ever have done. And I think perhaps that is the difference. And that's why. And the other thing is there's more conversations at work about people's mental health. People are expecting work to be an arena to look after their emotional and personal well-beings, which wasn't the case historically. So people feel more comfortable about discussing these issues at work. So perhaps that's making a difference as well.
And your title contains the expression that the man who mistook work for his life, or something like that.
Yes.
So there's a danger that we think of life and work as being the same thing, and obviously they're not.
Well, there is a danger when people look towards work to meet all their emotional needs. And I think that's the danger. Yeah. People, you know, there are certain needs that we can expect from families. Look, families are places where we experience a sense of belonging, a sense that people care about us, that they're interested in us, that they have our best interest at heart, that they will look after even our most fragile vulnerabilities. But of course, that's not the case at work. But nonetheless, people look towards work to fulfill their emotional needs. They're looking for it for a sense of personal validation, of well-being, of security and belonging. And I'm not suggesting that work shouldn't meet people's emotional needs, but I think sometimes people look towards work too much to resolve these emotional needs. And sometimes what I describe in my book is how people are even attempting to resolve sort of early family conflicts.
Yes, tell me about that.
Yeah. Well, people bring into their workplace their unconscious motivations, of course. And what I mean about that is they're acting out their internal lives. What people tend to do is act out their family dramas in the workplace. So they might, for example...
You've got me smirking, because this all sounds like Harry again, doesn't it? It all sounds like Prince Harry.
Yes, exactly.
Their early emotional experiences are being acted out in their workplace. Goodness gracious.
Exactly. I mean, once you put, you know, have that mindset, and once you see things in that way, you'll start to see things everywhere. Because, of course, what happens in the workplace is, you know, nobody's alone. Everybody, to a lesser or greater extent, is acting out their family dramas in the workplace. So if you can imagine the sort of confusion that can erupt from that sort of mindset. Now, you know,
Moving on from Prince Harry, does narcissism play a role in all of this?
Well, narcissism does play a role, of course. Well, you know, I can talk about narcissism because it's a very popular topic. People actually get a very wrong impression about narcissism. It's very talked about, it's thrown about. Everybody's boss is a narcissist, or their boyfriend or their girlfriend or their mother. Everybody these days is accused of being a narcissist, of course, without any real understanding of what narcissism actually is. Narcissism, in fact, is a trait. We all need some degree of narcissism, or we wouldn't have the self-belief we need in ourselves to promote ourselves, to go for a job, to express our opinions, to assert our authority. We all need some narcissism. So what I try to explain to people is narcissism really runs along a long continuum.
Yeah.
I mean, there are people who have a deficit of narcissism. Yeah. You know, they can't even express their opinions. They're unable to disagree. And although they might not cause a lot of problems in the workplace, they're not the game changers either. And then, of course, we have people who we hope, most leaders, will have a healthy dose of narcissism. And these are what I call productive narcissists. These are people who get things done. Yes, they're charismatic. You know, yes, they get people behind them. Yes, they have strong opinions, but they also have empathy. They also have care about other people. They can make it about them and not about themselves. So narcissism, a degree of narcissism, particularly in leaders, nobody can arrive to a leadership position without a good, healthy dose of it.
And while you're talking to a TV presenter, let's cover not only narcissism, but also imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome, is that pretty common?
Well, imposter syndrome, at one level, again...
I can't believe I'm sitting here.
Oh, okay. So maybe you suffer somewhere from a small dose of it. Look, everyone does, and again, it's no bad thing. You know, imposter syndrome on one level, it's simply doubts we have about ourselves, and that's not a bad thing. You know, to doubt ourselves, to doubt our capabilities, to wonder if we could improve, if we need to develop, if there's particular skills we need to learn to be more competent. Yeah, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Again, this is something that runs along continuum. So, you know, at a moderate or mild degree, it can really encourage people to do better, to really excel.
You don't write how-to books, but the person who reads your book, will he or she feel better at the end of it?
What I'd like from people at the end of the book is to think differently, to wonder about how they perceive situations, to start to challenge their own mindset, to wonder if their perceptions are accurate. I'd like people to wonder if the perceptions they have of the workplace are more located in their internal or their early lives, or is it actually happening? I want people to be more grounded in reality, to what's actually happening, so they can deal with real situations in the workplace.
Then you want to give an alternative to reading Spare. Thanks to Naomi Shragai. Last year, Sunday with Michael Portillo welcomed the celebrated musician Julian Lloyd-Webber to the studio, and he's back today. So join us after the break when we delve into what is classical music.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back. It's impossible to ignore the trends. Statistics from the last year show that the hours of classical music streamed on YouTube were up 90% on the year before. That may include just a short extract in a video, but the rise in interest in classical music is backed up by higher listening figures for classic FM radio. Apple failed to fulfill its promise to launch a classical streaming app in 2022, but other streaming services report a climb in classical downloads. Renowned cellist Julian Lloyd-Webber is with me now. We spent a delightful time yesterday exploring what classical music is, and we were helped by the very talented students at the Purcell School for Young Musicians, which is Britain's oldest music school. You'll be able to see our complete journey through 8 centuries online. Firstly, though, Julian, lovely to welcome you back to the studio and to work with you yesterday. Do you recognise this trend of an interest in classical music that is rising?
Yes, I mean, you hear different people say different things, but I've always, my whole career really, I wanted to bring the music I love and share it with people. And I think it's wonderful news that, you can't get away from the fact that if you combine, I think, the 3 radio stations that concentrate on classical music in this country, it's over 5 million. So it's not a small minority by any means.
And part of your thesis is that people listen to classical music very casually without perhaps recognising that they're having their first interface with classical music.
I think so. I think there's a massive amount of sort of classical music soundtrack in our lives, from films and adverts, everything. And sometimes people don't realise it's classical. And that's what we were trying to do yesterday, really.
And tell us a little bit about your association with the Purcell School for Young
Well, it's a wonderful school. I think there are 4 specialist music schools in this country, and a lot of them are free for the students because there are grants and various sources that they can access. And it's basically wonderful to see these children, because one of the things that I think has been also proven is that if you can learn an instrument and develop that skill, it helps all your other schoolwork. It really does.
And the people we saw yesterday really were of an extraordinary talent. In our exploration, we travelled through time, starting with Hildegard von Bingen in the 12th century, but we soon got to Mozart. Let's hear one of the most familiar compositions by Mozart, played by the students at the Purcell School for Young Musicians. A little night music, eine kleine Nachtmusik. Now, Mozart was an obvious choice to put on your list to explain the history of classical music, but tell us a bit about his stature.
Well, he's just extraordinary composer. I mean, he died at the age of 38, so we didn't, you know, he could have done so much more, but what he did was quite incredible. He's perfect, his music, and it's quite a challenge to perform it, because, you know, they're like little jewels. I read a lovely quote that he said that he chooses the notes that love each other. I think that's a beautiful quote, and his music sounds just like that.
Despite dying at the age of 38, and partly because he began at about the age of 3,
that's true,
he produced about 800 pieces, which cover the whole range, don't they?
Not quite. He didn't write for cello, which is mildly annoying, but, you know, apart from that, yes.
Yeah. And you weren't afraid to choose that very familiar piece.
No, that's what I wanted to do, really, with what we're planning for the future. You know, people think they don't know classical music, but in fact they do. And it surrounds us all the time.
Mm. Well, after Mozart, we reached another giant of classical composition, Ludwig van Beethoven. And this is probably Beethoven's best-known piece. It's played by Celeste Bolmat and Luca Newman, who celebrated his 30th birthday yesterday. Happy birthday to Luca.
Well,
the opening of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, no expense spared at GB News, played by 4 hands on a single,
brilliant playing.
piano.
I mean, who needs an orchestra?
Wasn't it absolutely superb?
Really great.
Now, I wanted to say that in this case, you chose not only one of the giants of the composers, but one of the giants of composition. This,
yes.
I don't know, might be the best-known piece of classical
music.
music.
Everyone knows it. I mean, everyone knows that 4-note opening. And, I mean, Beethoven just tore up the rule book, really. And I think the composers that we were looking at, they've all done that in their own way. And I think that's what's so exciting. I mean, the whole thing about classical music, that term doesn't really mean anything, does it? Because we're talking, even today, about 800 years of music, all completely different styles.
And what makes it all classical, then? How do we know it's all classical?
It's a very good question, and maybe the term should be consigned to the dustbin, because I'm not really sure it means that much, and the longer we go on, the different styles means less and less, really. But I think perhaps you could say instruments sometimes, yes. Orchestral instruments being used, the fact that it's notated and isn't improvised, although you know, it's hard to generalise about these things, because there are lots of composers that are, you know, taking in music from other countries and all that kind of thing.
I enjoy classical music very much, but I know precious little about it. So as a complete layman, what struck me, particularly about watching Beethoven's Fifth on a piano, was, as you say, 4 notes begin it.
Yeah.
And somehow they ricochet, and they are reflected, and they're repeated, and they're changed, and they return in a different form. Tell me a little bit about what goes on in the genius of composition.
Oh, well, I wish I knew. But, well, there's interesting... Lots of quotes about composers being asked. I think Tchaikovsky was asked, how do you compose? And he said, sitting down. I mean, how do you answer a question like that? And Beethoven, in particular, is just so extraordinary, the fact he went deaf very, very young and a very difficult life. It's inspiration, really, isn't it?
Yes. He was going deaf from, as you say, from quite a young age, increasing profound deafness, yet continuing to write music. And, by the way, beset by war across Europe, which was also influential to his life. Yeah. Well, let's turn to another composer, because, as Julian has already hinted, classical music is not just from previous centuries. The living American composer Philip Glass also made his list of classical music. Let's hear an extract from the String Quartet No. 5, which was used in the film Ex Machina. And I guess that makes your point. Music written in the 21st century, which is still recognisably classical. And we are going to attempt on GB News live on air a Philip Glass joke. Knock, knock.
Who's there? Who's there? Who's there? Philip Glass.
Why is that a funny joke?
Because he keeps repeating. He repeats and repeats and repeats. And actually, that music drives some people completely mad. But I like it. Again, he was a composer that's completely rewritten the rules, just repeating. And it's interesting you say, you know, what makes a piece classical. In fact, if that was played on electric guitars, I don't think anyone would say it was.
No, that's a good point. Tell us a little bit about Philip Glass.
Well, he started life not like so many composers, not making any money. And to make a living, he drove a cab around New York for years. And I think he still does it sometimes, because it's kind of in his bones. And you can hear it in the music. I mean, some people might say he was stuck in a jam. But, you know...
yeah, you can kind of hear the horns.
Yeah.
Someone has told me also, and I ought to know this because it's my area of expertise, it was used for a train accompanied train. I can imagine that, can't you? You can kind of...
I didn't know that, but I'm sure his music has been.
Yeah. Train and all of that. Tell us, I advertised this piece earlier by saying that we would talk about its importance to humankind and to our humanity. So to humankind, the fact that people have been producing classical music for so many centuries obviously means that it's important. I mean, at periods of history, I would say around the time of Mozart and Beethoven, I mean, society, at least upper society, was obsessed with classical music, wasn't it?
Well, I think Beethoven did say music can change the world, and I think that's why sometimes politicians are scared of music. I mean, we saw that in the Soviet Union, when they disciplined composers and decided to tell them that what they were writing wasn't good.
Yes.
And so great composers like Prokofiev, Shostakovich, they were told, you can't write like that.
And then, of course, we've had the great controversy over Richard Wagner, who happens to be one of my favourite composers, but who was taken up by Adolf Hitler and is therefore extraordinarily controversial. But, I mean, there have been times when society, royal families, courts, governments have been devoted to music. I mean, Richard Wagner, that I've just mentioned, he benefited from a king called Ludwig II, who thought that the promotion of art was the first duty of the state.
Well, that's terrific. I mean, Churchill was rumoured to have said, why are we... Somebody came in and said, we've got to cut the arts budget during the war. He said, why are we fighting the war then? I don't know if that's true, but, I mean, the other side of it is that you will get a situation, as happened in China with the Cultural Revolution, where they actually banned playing of instruments and banned music.
Yeah. So that's something about the importance of it to humankind. Now, the other thing is the importance to our humanity. In other words, I mean, I would argue that we haven't found a better way of expressing our emotions and the things that matter to us.
I think you're right. I mean, you know, some pieces of music just tear at your heart, and I think that's the fundamental thing about it. It just changes your emotions. I mean, that's an interesting thing, isn't it? If music can change emotions, I think that's why politics and music have an uncomfortable relationship sometimes.
Well, and also, you know, some philosophers have said there is a limit to what can be said with words.
That's true. I find it actually quite difficult to talk about music. It's
yes.
You know, you just say, well listen, you know, listen to that and see what you think.
Yes, but if I want to express, I mean, you know, we can go back to the Harry and Meghan drama, if you like. If I want to express extreme rivalry, extreme jealousy, extreme hurt, I might, well, no, not I, but you might be able to do it better with music than with words.
Yeah, but what would you choose? That's the question. What piece of music would you choose to show all this? I mean, it might not be Romeo and Juliet, I don't know.
Anyway, you and I have made a little film, and viewers have seen a part of it, and I hope that we will go back to that. So many thanks indeed to Julian Lloyd-Webber and to the wonderful musicians from the Purcell School. Luca, Celeste, Hannah, Jessica, Fiona and Emma.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking to have a mixture of sunny spells and blustery heavy showers. Let's take a look at the details. Showers will be most frequent for northwestern Scotland, where severe gales will gradually ease. Showers may also fall as snow over hills and mountains. Eastern Scotland will stay drier though. Northern Ireland will also see this changeable weather, with a largely dry morning transitioning to an afternoon of heavy showers, potentially with hail and thunder. Cloud will build across northern England this afternoon as the showers arrive. It will also be blustery along coastal areas and over higher ground. Wales will see frequent showers today, likely to be heavy at times. Despite temperatures climbing into double digits here yesterday, it will feel colder today with highs of around 8 Celsius. Central areas of England may escape from the strongest winds, but it will still be a breezy day as showers push through. But an increasing number of drier intervals should develop into the evening. After a bright start to Sunday across southeast England, more organised bands of showers will also arrive here, merging to form longer spells of rain at points in the afternoon. These bands of showers will bring gusty conditions to coastal areas of southern England, and it will feel chilly when exposed to the wind. Coastal gales will also develop later on. The showery theme will continue to the end of the day, though eastern areas will turn drier again for the evening. And that is how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Hour of Sunday with Michael Portillo, filling your Sunday mornings with good conversation, arts and entertainment. Coming up, reading the world through Braille, the system of raised dots that helps millions of blind and partially sighted people. Adventurer Amar Latif will be here. And with the cost of living crisis, we will learn the lessons of wartime rationing. Chef CJ Jackson will be here with a blitz of suggestions. That's all after the news with Tatiana Sanchez.
Michael, thank you. This is the latest from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has admitted the NHS is undeniably under enormous pressure. Rishi Sunak told the BBC he has a renewed sense of confidence and optimism to get to grips with the ongoing crisis within the NHS. Following emergency talks yesterday, he's calling on health leaders to take bold and radical action, saying a business-as-usual mindset won't fix the challenges. Health Minister Maria Caulfield told GB News the NHS is facing even more pressure this winter.
Seeing a twindemic of both COVID and flu. We're seeing over 50% increase in the number of patients in with flu at the moment. That has a knock-on effect if beds aren't available for A&E, which leads to the long waits which you describe, and then that has a knock-on effect on ambulances being stuck at A&E trying to unload their patients.
The president of the Royal College of Nursing says the current crisis in A&E is much worse than before. The union has warned upcoming strikes will be the biggest ever in the industry if the Prime Minister doesn't negotiate on pay. The RCN's General Secretary, Pat Cullen, has told Rishi Sunak to meet her halfway to ensure the industrial action this month doesn't go ahead. The union also says it's willing to consider a 10% pay rise rather than 19%. Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting told us they expect the government to sit down and negotiate.
I'm afraid I did have to say to the nurses, however much I totally sympathise with their pay claim, I would kind of, in all honesty, Camilla, say if I was in government today, I'd be able to give them 19%. But we did say we would sit down and negotiate. I think that's what the government should do.
The director of Orthodox Conservatives, Joseph Robertson, says the government needs to listen to the people on the ground who know the challenges and where the money should be spent.
I think a lot of the problem with what's going on is that they're speaking from a top-down perspective. They're not looking at experienced workers. I think we need more decentralisation. I think we need more power back to those who are running practices, who are running centres around the country, and actually listening to their ideas of where the money should go, rather than the government just pouring in money without any real structure to that development.
Labour has been urged to team up with the Scottish National Party to block the government's plans for minimum service levels during strikes. SNP's Westminster has requested a meeting with Sir Keir Starmer to discuss policy proposals. The bill will be introduced in Parliament in the coming weeks to ensure vital public services maintain a basic function during strikes. Russia has bombed eastern Ukraine minutes after ending its self-declared ceasefire in the country. The governor of Kharkiv says a man died as a result of Russian shelling. President Putin ordered a 36-hour ceasefire in honour of Russia's Orthodox Christmas, which ended at midnight last night. Ukraine had rejected that truce and shelling continued along the front line. Moscow says it's vowing to carry on fighting until it wins the war. Prince Harry has been accused of making the Invictus Games a target for extremists by revealing in his memoir that he killed 25 Taliban fighters in Afghanistan. The former head of the Royal Navy says the Games, which are due to be held in Dusseldorf in Germany, will now have serious security issues because of the connection to Harry. He called the Duke very stupid. And one of Princess Diana's most famous dresses is set to go on sale at Sotheby's in New York later on this month. The strapless evening dress is worth between £66,000 and £99,000. Diana first wore the dress for an official portrait with the then Prince of Wales in 1991. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Portillo.
Thanks, Tatiana. Benjamin Franklin once said that only two things are certain in life: death and taxes. We talk happily about taxes, but we invent euphemisms to avoid discussing our passing or our moving on. World-renowned forensic anthropologist, researcher and author Professor Dame Sue Black does speak of death. In her career, much of her work has been with the dead. She has made significant contributions to the fields of forensic science, particularly in the area of human identification. Her work has been instrumental in solving numerous criminal cases and bringing certainty to the families of missing persons. In the recent Royal Institution Christmas lectures, she talked about our own mortality and why death has become taboo. I'm very, very pleased to welcome Sue Black. It's lovely to see you.
Thank you.
At one time in my career, after I was Defence Secretary, I was involved on a committee that oversaw the digging up of the dead in a place called Srebrenica, which was a massacre in the former Yugoslavia. And we took DNA samples from, I think, about 100,000 people to try to identify possibly about 8,000 who've been murdered at that place, matching DNA. Is that your sort of work, or has your work moved on from that?
Unfortunately, that's still an important part of the work that we do. So that we either are working in the criminal sphere, so we're looking at identification of individuals, perhaps as a result of a single crime, and it's often people who are not found where you expect them to die. So most of us expect to die at home or in a hospital, and our identity isn't in question. So it's where a body is found and we don't initially know who they might be. It might be that we have a mass fatality event, and so, for example, in an explosion or in a fire, bodies may be disrupted, and so, again, identification becomes important there, and in the war crime scenarios that you suggested. So sometimes it's very much humanitarian, but sometimes it is actually for the purposes of the court, because somebody is being accused of a crime.
From what I recall, in these instances, and these go back obviously some decades, so things may have changed, a DNA match would be made, and then before any kind of announcement could be made, that would be compared with other evidence. For instance, the clothing or the jewellery that the deceased was wearing, as far as one knew at the time of the death, and other circumstantial evidence. This would still be part of the pattern, would it?
Yes, so we will do absolutely everything that we can to ensure that we have the right answer. Because if you have the wrong answer, then you don't impact on one family, you impact on two, because you've handed the wrong body back to the wrong family, and that's unthinkable. So whilst we think DNA is the solution for everything, it isn't always, because sometimes DNA can be through contamination. So simply picking up the DNA sample may mean that it's perhaps blood splatter from somewhere else. So we will go through, is it a male? Is it somebody of the right sort of age? Do we have fingerprints that we can still look at? Do we have dental records? Do we have medical records? And it's sometimes the accusation we're given where, why does it take so long? He had a lanyard round his neck. Well, at the end of the day, we have to prove that that person on the lanyard really is the person wearing it. Otherwise, we cause an awful lot of grief to families.
Siblings, I remember, was another area of difficulty because the DNA would be extremely close, wouldn't it?
Yes, and often for DNA in situations such as Srebrenica or any of the other war crimes investigations, what you're doing is you're comparing familial DNA. So it's not your own personal DNA. No, that's where we can get to the 1 in a billion scenario. But you're saying here is a mother or a father, and that doesn't tell you which of the children it is. It tells you it's just one of their children. And one of the mass graves that we had in Kosovo, for example, it was 11 members of the same family, and 8 of them were children. And so even though the DNA tells you they're the child, it doesn't tell you which child it is. And that's really important, because if you are going to accuse somebody of a war crime, if everybody is of combatant age, then there is an argument that says it's a fair death. But when the individuals we were looking at were as young as 2 or 4, then you have evidence that says this is not a normal war situation, this is a war crime.
What advances do you feel that you and I'm sure your teams have been making? What have been new techniques that you've been pioneering?
I think, there's no doubt that DNA changed the entire world of forensic investigations in the 1980s. No doubt about it whatsoever. But we've become so smart at that now we're picking up such minuscule areas of DNA that contamination and cross-contamination has become a problem. So we've become a little bit too clever in some ways. For us, the work that we've been doing is we've been looking at identification from different parts of the body. So some of the crimes that I work on are really the worst in society, which is the identification of children in relation to sexual abuse. And often the perpetrator will have parts of their anatomy in the image. And most frequently, it's the back of the hand. So there's a huge amount of information about you on the back of your hand. So I guarantee the pattern of veins on the back of your right hand will be different to your left. I guarantee that the pattern of skin creases across your knuckles will be different across every finger and different in identical twins.
This is almost like fingerprinting.
Almost. And it's using anatomy, which is what's really interesting. The most ancient of sciences, things that we've known about for centuries, now just applying them into the real world that says, how can we use this information to help?
And has that sort of information achieved convictions?
Oh, yes. So about 82% of the cases that we take on have resulted in a change of plea. And that's from either no comment or not guilty to an admission. And that's really important because it does a couple of things. It saves a tremendous amount of money in the courtroom. But what it also does is for those young people who have been involved in that abuse, they now are not going into court. They're not being questioned in the same way. And that's a hugely important step forward, I think, for them in terms of a protection. And we work for both the prosecution and the defence because it's really important. You are innocent until you're proven guilty. And so science must be able to work across both sides of the legal system.
A lot of people might wonder why you would go into such a gruesome business. But I wonder whether part of the answer is that you could foresee the satisfaction of contributing to justice.
That's really important. I'm an anatomist from day one. That's where my heart genuinely lies, is the human body is the most amazing mechanism. It really is. And it tells us so much about ourselves. Being able to translate that into real-world problems where you can help to solve either issues of justice or issues of identification that allows somebody to have that family member return to them is incredibly important. People who have a missing family member often say their life goes into a stutter and they just can't move on till they know. And they often live with that really cruel thing of false hope. And false hope is incredibly cruel. So when we come back and say, I'm sorry, it is your son, your mother, it's very painful, but it's the start in some ways of that healing process. So it's a kindness as well.
Most of us never see a dead body. You see lots, I'm afraid to say. But that has helped, I think you argue, to make death into a taboo subject, something that we don't wish to confront. Tell me a bit about how you confront your own mortality.
Oh, I am very, very pragmatic about this. So I know I'm going to die. Now, I don't want to die anytime soon. I'd quite like it to be a long time in the future, but I know it's going to happen. And so therefore you can't pretend that it's not going to, and you have to be realistic about it. My grandmother grew up on the west coast of Scotland, and she believed that death walked alongside you every day of your life. And at some point or other, your paths would cross, and that would happen either in the next 10 minutes or in the next 50 years. And her rationale was, if death is going to be beside you every step of the way, wouldn't it be better if they were a friend than an enemy? And because she grew up in the 1800s, it would have been totally improper for her to have a friend who was a man. And so death in our family has always been a woman. It's always been feminine. It's always been female. And somehow that takes away some of that aggression that we associate with death, which has very much been fed from our media and from novels, you know, films, all of these sorts of things give you this concept that death is something to be afraid of. Now, I don't want to spend my entire life being afraid of something. I'd rather embrace it. So I know exactly if I get my way, what my death will look like and what my life beyond my death will look like.
Do you think there's a certain decadence, then, in our society today that we find so many euphemisms to avoid talking about death, frankly?
I think we've fallen out of love with death. If you go back to the Victorians, they were very much in love with a good death. A good death and a good funeral was something to be celebrated. It was a pomp and it was a ceremony. And if you go back into rural communities, when Granny died, she was laid out in her coffin in the front room, and everybody would come around and they would talk about her and they would tell the stories. And we've lost that intimate connection with death. As death became medicalised, it's been removed from us in many ways. Most people will die in a hospital or in a hospice in a controlled environment. And suddenly the body's whisked away as if it's something that is just unclean and needs to be removed. And in this country, most frequently, the lid goes on the coffin and it gets screwed down and you never see that person again. And being able to see somebody in death is a really important point of the healing and the grieving process, I think. I just think we've let it go too far.
To pick up your word medicalised, it's very much on people's lips this morning, because one of the things that's being said is that part of the problem of the National Health Service is that we can allow people to live for very long periods of time when their quality of life has gone. Do you have a position on that?
So I do. I mean, if I'm going to get an extra 10 years of my life, I wanted it when I was 20. I don't want it when I'm 80 because of all of the consistent problems that are likely to come with that. So I'm very comfortable. I don't go to my GP. In fact, the last time I went to my GP for any reason was when I was pregnant with my last daughter, and she's 25. So I'll go if I need to go, but I'm very fortunate I haven't needed to. And I'm also very pragmatic that when it is my fate and my time, then I would like to be able to move on then and not become dependent on an NHS system, on the drugs that would keep me alive. I want to experience death because I'm only going to do it once. I'm not going to do it twice. And I want to know what it feels like. I want to know what it sounds like, what it tastes like, what it looks like. It's the last great adventure.
Marvellously said. And I think I say hear, hear to that. Many thanks indeed to Dame Sue Black. Coming up, it's 90 years since the London Underground adopted the famous Harry Beck tube map. But with apps and online tools, is the traditional map dead? After the break.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late-night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Welcome back. I always fear being London-centric, but even strangers to the British capital may be familiar with the style of its map of the Underground. The design by Harry Beck, published 90 years ago in 1933, made intelligible how to navigate the complex system. But it created in our minds a rather misleading image of London's shape. For example, the south of the Thames is very sparsely represented on the tube map, and the schematic layout, which was based on a wiring diagram, gives little sense of scale. Over the years, the map has undergone numerous updates, but its core design has remained. Dr. Maxwell Roberts is an international authority on schematic map design from the University of Essex, and you're with me now. How well do you think this 90-year-old map has stood the test of time?
It's stood the test of time in terms of the way Beck designed it, has sort of continued in London longer than any other map around the world. In terms of attaining Beck's wonderful early design creation, maybe it's not weathered quite so well.
And why do you say that? I mean, I have a feeling that in particular the addition of the Elizabeth line has proved to be a terrible challenge to the map changes. It doesn't look quite as, I don't know, all of one piece as it used to.
It's rather crushed up and squeezed into a small space. The thing is that when Beck designed his map in 1933, East London ended at Bow, and today's map, the pocket map, is exactly the same size, but there's 200 extra stations to fit on it.
Extraordinary thing. Tell me a little bit about the human drama of Beck, because supposedly he was very badly overlooked. Is that true?
It is. He was a very meticulous worker, but he was working in an unofficial capacity. He was never an official map designer for London Transport. And in the 1950s, he created a design which they fully supported, which really distorted the geography of London a lot. It had all sorts of strange things on it, like Upminster right next to the River Thames. And then new blood came in, Harold Hutchison, who was the new person responsible for these things. And he decided that he would rather have a go himself rather than go to Beck. It was a very personal decision. And because Beck wasn't actually employed by London Transport, he was working in a college lecture at the time, he was sort of just out of the loop, and he didn't find out about the new map until he saw it on sort of stations. And yes, and by that, once he reached that point, an outsider with a replacement, he was lost.
Although I believe modern maps bear tribute to Beck, don't they? They say based on an original design by Harry Beck.
They do, but I'm not sure that Beck would be entirely happy with that. I think Beck designed his map with a certain way of thinking, which is you can't really see on today's map. That Beck approached map design in a certain way, a certain level of meticulousness, trying to get things right, trying to get things good. And he might say, well, hang on a minute, the people who designed this map, maybe I wouldn't have done it like that.
Do you ever think that in the modern age you could do better?
Yes, I think there's lots of people who think they can do better, but part of my job is to actually test my claims. But yes, I think the current map was introduced in 2001.
You're being too modest. I know you've produced a map. I was setting the question up for you. Let's have a look at the map that you've produced and talk me through it. Why is your map different and better?
It's simpler line trajectories. The whole point about making a schematized map is it's got to be a simplification of reality. If you turn the twisting, complex curves of reality into a mass of zigzags, you've not simplified reality, you've just changed the shape of the complexity. So I've straighter lines, and it's more geographically accurate. Any person at Acton will tell you that the Underground Map's a complete mess in their area. Acton Main Line is north of Acton South. It's this map's more geographically accurate, and it's showing the walking interchanges more convincingly. If the current map advertises easy walking distance interchanges between stations, but some of them are a long way apart. They've got long lines connecting them. So I've tried to combine both aspects of design, of effective design for maps, simple line trajectories without distorting geography.
How wonderful. And are you the modern Beck? That is to say, are you being overlooked?
I think that if London Transport cares about their intellectual property as much as they say they do, they really need to take a good look at what they're doing. And yes, I think I've certainly done a better job than the current map. Apart from anything else, I've just made it bigger. A tiny little map for all these extra stations, that's just wrong. No one can read it anymore.
You must let me have a pirate copy, because I would love to have a better map than the one I have. Now, you and I are both talking on the assumption that maps matter. They obviously matter to you. They're your life's work. But they matter to me. I do use my app, but actually, dare I say it, I don't find the TfL app terribly useful. It doesn't immediately bring me the information that I want. And because I've been at this for 70 years, I pretty much know the tube map, but I just occasionally need a little reminder when I'm going into unfamiliar territory. So I'm definitely a continuing map user. I think there may be many who just argue, oh, no, you don't need maps, you've got apps. Yeah, I think that a lot more people would use the maps if the maps were nicer. There's all sorts of disadvantages to apps, such as you don't learn about where you are. And there's certain tasks they don't do very well, like I'm at Oxford Circus, my appointment's just cancelled, what can I do? And the journey planning app won't help you with that. And of course, when your phone's run out of batteries or in a bad reception area. Or you're underground, yes, absolutely. Yeah. So I think there's a huge case to be made to support different people's preferences in how they want to navigate the network. Some people really don't get on with maps, so fine, give them a first-rate app. Other people really want to sort of, keep their brain working, learn about the city while they're using it, give them a really good map. They need to cater for sort of all tastes and preferences. I find actually that they have provided a new area of social interaction, because one was frequently asked in the past by someone, do you know where to go? Do you know where this street is or that street? Now I can whip out my phone, and with my map, I can look up where they're going and I can show them. But equally, I can get up the tube map on my phone and I can show them that. I can, explain to them exactly what they need to do. And I rather like this, actually. I rather like the fact that I can help anybody. Before, if I didn't know where Westminster Gardens was, I just had to say no. But now I can say, oh, yes, I'll find Westminster Gardens for you and show it to you. Yeah, I think that's the important thing, that there's so many different questions you can ask geographically, and there's so many different ways of answering them, that just focusing on apps and nothing else is actually a mistake. The world's a complicated place, and one solution doesn't necessarily fit all. When I travel in Europe, I buy international rail tickets, and you literally don't know where you are. I'm travelling across Germany by train. The train could break down. Where am I? I'm at Munich. It's really disorientating. And while we're on the international theme, we've been talking about London Underground. It is iconic. It is globally famous. But are there others? I always get the map in New York City, which is an amazing wiring diagram because they all come together in Manhattan, 10 or 20 lines running south to north. Which are the other iconic maps?
That's a tough question. I've never seen a map I haven't wanted to fix, and that includes my own designs. I like Scandinavia. I like minimalistic maps that sort of don't try and do too much. I've liked maps from Lisbon, St. Petersburg,
Hello, can you hear me?
Copenhagen.
Hello. Lovely, good.
I like maps that really sort of emulate Beck's original purity of his design. His original 1933 design was such a wonderful piece of work, and I wish more people would look at it closely.
Yes, I can hear you,
and try and understand how it differs from what's being offered to them at the moment.
So here's our opportunity 90 years later to set things right, because Beck was overlooked. Tell us why you think Beck was a really important person in the history of mapmaking.
Because he intuitively knew how to create an effective design with nothing else to go on. He had the design rules, horizontal, vertical lines, 45-degree diagonals, and within those design rules, he did something very special. He created a design that was elegant, simple, not too geographically distorting, not compared with today's map. And these pieces all came together for the first time with nothing else to go on. He just pulled it out of his head.
Today we remember Harry Beck. Thanks to Dr. Max Roberts. Coming up, this week saw World Braille Day, celebrating the birth of Louis Braille. How does this system of raised dots continue to transform lives? That's after the news headlines for Tatiana Sanchez.
Michael, thank you. It's coming up to 12:30. I'm Tatiana Sanchez in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has admitted the NHS is undeniably under enormous pressure. Rishi Sunak told the BBC he has a renewed sense of confidence and optimism to get to grips with the ongoing crisis within the health service. Following emergency talks yesterday, he's calling on health leaders to take bold and radical action, saying a business-as-usual mindset won't fix the challenges. Health Minister Maria Caulfield told GB News the NHS is facing even more pressure this winter.
We're seeing a twindemic of both COVID and flu. We're seeing over 50% increase in the number of patients in with flu at the moment. That has a knock-on effect if beds aren't available for A&E, which leads to the long waits, which you describe, and then it has a knock-on effect on ambulances being stuck at A&E trying to unload their patients.
The president of the Royal College of Nursing says the current crisis in A&E is much worse than before. The union has warned upcoming strikes will be the biggest ever in the industry if the Prime Minister doesn't negotiate on pay. The RCN's General Secretary, Pat Cullen, has told Rishi Sunak to meet her halfway to ensure the industrial action this month doesn't go ahead. The union also says it's willing to consider a 10% pay rise rather than 19%. Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting told us they expect the government to sit down and negotiate.
I'm afraid I did have to say to the nurses, however much I totally sympathise with their pay claim, I would kind of, in all honesty, Camilla, say if I was in government today, I'd be able to give them 19%. But we did say we would sit down and negotiate. I think that's what the government should do.
Labour has been urged to team up with the Scottish National Party to block the government's plans for minimum service levels during strikes. The SNP's Westminster has requested a meeting with Sir Keir Starmer to discuss policy proposals. The bill will be introduced in Parliament in the coming weeks to ensure vital public services maintain a basic function during strikes. And one of Princess Diana's most famous dresses is set to go on sale at Sotheby's in New York later this month. The strapless evening dress is worth between £66,000 and £99,000. Diana first wore the dress for an official portrait with the then Prince of Wales in 1991. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to Sunday with Michael Portillo.
week marked World Braille Day, celebrating and recognising the important role that Braille has played in the lives of people who are blind or partially sighted. Its inventor, Louis Braille, lost his sight as a little boy and devised his system of raised dots in his teens. It originated from a 12-dot military cryptography code, which was used for nocturnal communication on the battlefield. Louis Braille simplified it to 6 dots, used to signify letters and punctuation, and a total of 64 symbols. Amal Latif is an adventurer and entrepreneur who's blind, and he joins us down the line, I believe, from Lanzarote. Welcome to the programme. And amongst your many other journeys, I think you once went to Louis Braille's house, didn't you?
I did, yes. I run a travel company called Travelize, and we took a group of blind and sighted travellers to his home just outside Paris. And that was just such an incredible experience, you know, to be there and, you know, be in his dad's workshop where young Louis did actually become blind.
Just tell us a little bit about that. He was in his dad's workshop and somehow with a tool, he managed to do something which eventually led to his loss of sight.
Absolutely. So young Louis, they used to live above the workshop. So he came down at the age of about 3 and he picked up one of those tools that you make holes from. So his dad used to make saddles for horses. And young Louis was enthusiastically, you know, putting the pin in the leather and brought it closer to his eyes. But he ended up jabbing one of his eyes. And the infection spread right across to the other eye, resulting in blindness. And, you know, he went to school and often struggled with, you know, not being able to see text and stuff. And that's what led to the creation of Braille.
Amal, tell us about the importance of Braille to you.
Braille is important. I mean, for example, I became blind at the age of 18. You know, I woke up one morning and I suddenly couldn't see the poster at the end of my bed. And I realized that my life was now going to change. You know, I didn't want to be blind, but the reality was that my life had changed. So I quickly started learning Braille. And, you know, it takes a bit of time to learn it. So, and the thing was, I was passionate about entering into the financial world. And so not only was I learning Braille, but there is special maths Braille. So I went down to the Royal National College for the Blind in Hereford and spent a week there. Wasn't that great at learning the maths Braille, but had a good time. And went back up to Strathclyde University in Glasgow and I tried using it. And so I used Braille in various forms. And, you know, these days I label my newspaper, my letters in Braille. You know, it's so important. You know, I was at my friend's house the other day and he invited me over to read a book to his 3-year-old daughter. And I'm like, my goodness, does he realize I'm blind? So I went there anyway and he goes, oh, Uncle Ammer's going to read you a book. And I'm like, how is Uncle Ammer going to read him a book? And then he got me a Braille book to read to his young girl. And it was amazing and it had tactile pictures. So, I mean, it just helps integrate blind people into the world. And, you know, I mean, I guess the important thing is that he developed this 200 years ago. And as you said, he was in his teens. And that was groundbreaking technology at the time.
And talking about technology, to what extent then do you think that Braille has been superseded? I assume that there are many other applications that are of enormous use to you.
Absolutely. I mean, so these days, I mean, for 200 years, it's been groundbreaking and it's really helped blind people, you know, educate and be informed. And so Louis Braille gave us the greatest gift that you can ever give someone that's blind, you know, and that's independence. And now, you know, it's battling with the existing technology. So at the moment, you know, I've got apps on my phone that read stuff. So I just point them at text and it reads it. You take pictures of menus and they read them. But, you know, so, you know, Braille was developed by a blind person for blind people. And I think going forward, it's great if, you know, technology companies allow blind people to develop technology, like, for example, Apple and Amazon, Alexa, they do have blind people actually programming their technologies, you know, and it's really helping not only blind people, but not a lot of sighted people. The whole Alexa thing, you know, that was originally, I think, you know, developed with blind people in mind, and now we're all using it. So there is a bit of a battle going on now, but Braille definitely has made a massive difference and continues to do so. I mean, here I am in the Canary Islands, I'm using a lift, and, you know, there's Braille buttons everywhere. And, you know, that's just so incredible.
All the way back in the 1990s, when I was a minister, my opposite number at one point was David Blunkett. And he obviously thought he might well succeed me as a minister. And he was concerned as to how a minister would cope. We were already producing material in Braille because he was the opposition spokesman, so we felt we had an obligation to do that. And of course, I have to be deeply impressed by the way David rose to some of the highest offices in public life, despite being blind, and obviously relying on Braille. It was marvellous to watch him. You know, he could have his notes in his pocket. He could be reading his notes in his pocket, giving the idea of being absolutely spontaneous in his delivery while his hand was working away on the Braille in his pocket. And it's extraordinary what it enabled him to do.
Absolutely. I mean, the thing is, the people who learn Braille from an early age, what they do is they put one hand on the left side, one hand on the right, and they construct the whole sentence together in their head. So they're reading the first half of the sentence and they're reading the end of the sentence to the middle, and it all makes sense. So their hands just move like this. And it is just so incredible. And I actually, I chatted to David Blunkett. He said once that Tony Blair was so excited because he'd got him all the material in Braille. But what he ended up getting, I think it was, the material was in the language of, in Swedish rather than in English. And I've been on planes and they've said, oh, we've got a Braille health safety message for you, but you know, it's often in Spanish, you know. So what people don't realize is that Braille is like an alphabet and you can use it in different languages, you know. And but yeah, I can imagine, you know, we blind people, we do have advantages, you know, with things like Braille, or, you know, I sometimes have an AirPod in my ear and, you know, I don't need to have the phone visible. So I have my phone under the table, and while I'm like at meetings, if I get a bit bored, I'm checking my emails without anybody knowing. I've got to work on making sure my face isn't like giving it away, you know.
Amal Latif, that is very generously said, to say that a blind person has advantages. I congratulate you on your wonderful career, as I congratulate David Blunkett on his. And thank you so much for being on GB News with us today.
It's a pleasure to meet.
Coming up, as the cost of living crisis begins to bite, should we look to the past for lessons to make our food go further? That's after the break.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you know, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons? I don't believe in prisons. I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. As we have entered a new year, many of our resolutions may revolve around food. Perhaps you promise to eat more healthily to compensate for the Christmas glut of chocolate and mince pies. Well, during the Second World War, Britons had to be resourceful with their recipes, eating what was grown seasonally and what was obtainable with ration cards and coupons. By looking back to that time, can we find a way to eat healthily, to reduce food waste and to save money? I'm delighted to be joined by CJ Jackson, Director of Seafood by Design and one of the authors of the Ration Diet book. Very good to see you. Why did you think of writing a ration diet book?
I was invited to write one with a couple of historians who focused a lot and very knowledgeable about World War II. And from that, they wanted a chef to come in and have a look at what people were eating during the Second World War. And actually, to be fair, it was quite grim, or it sounded very grim. You know, I was shown a load of recipes, and I looked at those and thought, well, I'd be struggling to sell those in restaurants or even selling them at home. There was a lot of offal and that sort of thing. And what I wanted to do was look at some of those recipes and use that ethos of eating healthily, also eating a lot less than we tend to do now, and create some new recipes along the lines of the old-fashioned ones. And it was a struggle. It was a real struggle trying to keep the nutritional level the same and right the way across the board, the calorific value of everything I'd created, although it was really lean and low fat and all sorts of things, it was quite hard to do. But it's very interesting following what they did during the World War II and how the government managed and planned a diet for the nation.
Yes, and how successful do you think that planning for the diet was? I don't suppose there were many obese people during the Second World War. And of course, we do hear stories about men who were unfit for service because they had bow legs and rickets and things like that. During the Second World War itself, when the government really became involved in the national diet, how successful was it?
I think it was the big success story of the Second World War. In the First World War, there was a lot of malnutrition, and they realised, they hadn't planned it, and they realised there was going to be a lot of issues. When they came into the Second World War, they actually had a lot of planning in place. So as soon as war broke out, they thought about how they were going to feed the nation, and they had a lot of programmes in place. So I think when they went into the Second World War, they really knew what they were doing.
You're clutching a card,
Yes.
which is, of course, important to all of this. It says dig for victory.
Yes.
What were they digging for?
Digging was your own allotment, so creating your own vegetables. There was a big focus on eating more veg, particularly things like potatoes. And one of the issues that we had at the end of the 1930s has been a big push on trying to get people to grow their own with a view to being self-sufficient, or as far as they could be self-sufficient. We imported huge quantities of food before the Second World War, and they were trying to sort of reduce that because they knew that as soon as you got a boat out on the water, it was an open target. And by 1940s, it actually made us, by a lot of planning, completely self-sufficient in potatoes. And potatoes were a big part of the diet.
And in case anybody wonders what is the relevance of all of this, I mean, we are now pretty worried about fuel security.
Yep.
And I think we're beginning to worry a bit about food security as well. I mean, who knows what the future is?
Well, we do import a lot of product. I work in the fish industry and we're importing a lot of fish, but there's a lot of things around our own coast
and things that we're actually able to achieve in the UK. Back in before the Second World War, we suddenly became very short of onions because all the onions that we used were mainly from Spain.
Yeah.
And therefore, at the beginning of the war, I've made you a lovely pie. It's got no onion in it because we didn't have onions to begin with.
What a shame. Let us now turn to this pie, and thank you so much for bringing it in.
Pleasure. I've warmed it for you.
Still warm, yes.
No, I warmed it up for you.
You warmed it up, did you? Tell me, first of all, what this pie is called.
Right. Well, this is a traditional Lord Woolton pie. And Lord Woolton was the Minister of Food. They didn't think he was going to be very successful. He was hugely successful. And what he was trying to do was get people to... struggling there with my pastry. But he was trying to get people to eat more vegetables. And this is a vegetable pie. I remember when I first served it, I thought, well, no, we're never going to like that. It's absolutely delicious. So the topping is made from potato and swede, mashed, a little bit of flour, and I've used butter today, but actually there's no reason why you couldn't use oil to make the pastry.
Now, wait a minute. Butter would have been in very short supply.
Very short supply. So I only used, for this pie, it had, in old money, 2 ounces, so it's about 50 grams of butter in there, a little bit of water, but the majority of that is the mash. So what I've got...
I have a knife and fork.
Of course.
CJ,
there you are. You have to try some.
Indeed.
So this
Help
is...
yourself.
Well, this is a dig your own. So it's... you've got celeriac in there, there's carrot. The gravy going in there is made using Vegemite, or it was vegetable extract, but Vegemite is the thing to be eaten now. Lots of... I've used a little bit of licence here as a chef, and I put quite a few herbs in there as well.
I was going to say, there's masses of flavour. There may not be any garlic or onion, but nonetheless, it's got a nice bite to it. It's very nice.
And I put a little bit of thyme, a little bit of rosemary just out of the garden. And, you know, I remember eating it for the first time thinking, oof, I absolutely loved it. It's so delicious. You cook... the way that the liquid is thickened is that oatmeal was a key thing. So they'd suggest you thicken with oatmeal rather than flour. Very good, obviously, because it's a lot of roughage. And then you add whatever the seasonal vegetables you've got. And I had opened up my fridge yesterday. I had carrots, I had a leek, I had some celeriac and had parsnips. And didn't put any garlic in because, obviously, that wouldn't have been around and about then. And no onion in this. But I actually think it's very nice. A bit of a mouthful of it.
I think it's very nice. Now, the other question is, you see, I served myself exactly a quarter of that, because that would have been my ration, wouldn't it? I would have been expected. And would this have been my main meal of the day, do you imagine? That
would have been main meal, but loads of potatoes to go with it. Mash went into everything. They were recommending that we ate a pound of potatoes a day. The Irish were eating that amount. We generally tended to eat about half a pound. So that was 250 grams in new money. And it was encouraging people to eat as much potato as possible. Loads of energy and low fat. And the nation managed on it. They walked everywhere. Petrol was rationed. You had the days when ladies had 18-inch waists. I've never had an 18-inch waist. But, and that was really just to keep everybody active, mobile and fit and healthy.
This is quite a delicate subject. There's a Conservative Member of Parliament who's just got into difficulty about lecturing people on how to budget. So, do you think there is a practical element to all of this? Do you think that people who are finding it a bit of a struggle at the moment to put food on the table, do you think there is some lesson from the wartime experience for them?
Certainly, and I think that budgeting is such a difficult thing, and and you've got to feed a family. But encouraging people to eat more veggies and in season is so important because we have all these wonderful fruit and veg available, but actually the best value and probably the best quality is going to be in seasonal product. So I've chosen very winter vegetables. Going into spring, you've got things like spring greens and cabbage and that sort of thing. There's in my ration book diet, which I wrote with Carol and Mike.
Don't be afraid of your book. It's a lovely thing.
It's one of my... Well, it's an old book, but actually it's got so much sense in it. Most of it was written by Carol and Mike. And they live the 1940s lifestyle. They even have a 1940s Citroen that they drive around in. But they really understood how life was very simple, but we had an abundance of product that comes in seasonality and seasonal veg, seasonal fish. We're just coming out of the game season now because game's there. They ate a lot of offal as well because offal tends to be less expensive and there's not a huge market for it at the moment. So I think it is possible, just going right back to grassroots, and working out how you can cost a meal and not make it too expensive. That wouldn't have been a hugely costly meal for 4 and with loads of mashed potatoes. And actually what they were trying to do was get people to eat the skins as well. White bread was very popular before the Second World War, and then they went back to what they refer to as peasant bread, which is putting all the goodness back in, using all the rusk and all of that. And that, we now love brown bread. But before that, you know, before the war, it was like, oh, it wasn't hugely successful. But we now love it. So it's eating every last bit and not wasting anything.
But CJ, if you go down to, let's say, a market, where it's probably the cheapest, and you buy a bunch of vegetables to make your Lord Walton pie, will that be cheaper than going to a shop of frozen food and buying frozen pizza?
I would say a frozen is a great advantage, and you can get a lot of frozen vegetables as well. I think it's a nutritional value as well, because you're going to get a load of... I mean, they tell us to eat, 5 portions of vegetables and more fruit. And I think that you have got the health benefits of this. Pizza's fantastic, but is it filling? This is a filling dish. And I think that cost-effective-wise, you can make it and you can reheat it. With pizza, you don't want to reheat it. So, does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. I just think this is such a delicate subject, isn't it? Because a lot of people out there are finding it very tough, and we have to be a bit careful about the tone. But you do think that looking back to the wartime experience, when people really had it rough, can tell us something about what we should be doing in future.
Definitely, and in here, and you can get everything online as well now. But eating things like mackerel, you know, we've even canned mackerel, fantastic product, and smoked mackerel, all of those things, you know, nice and filling. I think it's ways of filling up, but also, you know, if you've got children now, it's a hard one because, you know, children have got a particular taste, perhaps. It might be harder. I have a son that loves vegetables, so he'd tuck into this with no problem. But I think it is hard, and you don't want to preach. I absolutely understand that.
Well, I think that rationing continued, if I'm right, until 1953 or possibly even 54. And Alistair Stewart, are you there? You were already born in that period, weren't you? So was I, by the way.
A very good afternoon to you, and how absolutely splendid to see all of that superb stuff, as well as very collectible recipe books and lovely old documents from a previous era. Gave us all an appetite.
And going, Alistair, from 1952 to 2023, what are you serving up for us this afternoon?
Sorry, Michael, could you say that again? I couldn't hear.
What are you serving up on your programme this afternoon?
Yes, let me take one step back. Yesterday we looked at the right to strike and the right to work, which the Prime Minister in his 5 pledges speech talked quite a lot about the right to strike, but just talked about minimum requirements in public services, health, transport and the rest of it, but not your right, my right and everybody else's right to actually work and get to work. So we're looking a little more widely at the 5 pledges today, and we've got Damon Green and Freddie Gray from Spectator coming on to discuss it. We're also digging quite deeply into what was said at yesterday's really quite important, which I know you talked about earlier on as well, NHS Summit at Downing Street. And I was the guy who interviewed Alan Milburn years ago, who said Labour's relationship with the private sector is not a one-night stand. Well, both the Conservatives and Labour this morning seem to be exploring what surplus capacity the private sector might have in health and care, with a view to buying a bit of it to help us all out. So I think it should be quite an interesting conversation, and I do hope folk can join us.
Well, that is Alistair Stewart, who'll be taking over in just a moment. It just remains me to thank all my guests this week, especially those wonderful students from the Purcell School of Young Musicians. I'll be back next week.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking to have a mixture of sunny spells and blustery heavy showers. Let's take a look at the details. Showers will be most frequent for northwestern Scotland, where severe gales will gradually ease. Showers may also fall as snow over hills and mountains. Eastern Scotland will stay drier though. Northern Ireland will also see this changeable weather, with a largely dry morning transitioning to an